Had it not been for the fact that everyone else had already planned out what they would go on to become once high school came to an end, Mike probably wouldn't be dreading it so much. He couldn't have decided what he wanted to be if it hit him on the head. He had never had any intention of going to college before, so that was completely out of the question. Too much money for enrolling into classes he knew he wouldn't pay attention to. But now he was forced to face the real world, and the struggles of being an adult. He needed a job, and money, if he wanted to keep his new apartment. The apartment had been nothing too special. In fact, it was mediocre at best. Barely furnished and messy all over. But considering how much he laid around all day, he'd only moved in about a week ago. He would have to make rent somehow before the start of next month. The problem was that, to get a job, you needed to be a hard worker, and Mike was not. High school proved that enough. But now he needed to get his act together, or it was out in the streets for him. If he hadn't nodded off so much in his classes, he probably wouldn't even be in this mess. Mike was sitting on the couch with the TV on in the background. He wasn't actually watching it, he was just having it on as background noise while he sifted through the job listings in the newspaper. There was a job opening as a waiter. No. He'd already had a hard time dealing with other people's demands as it was. He didn't want a job that he had to have both customers and his boss yelling at him for making the smallest mistakes. One as a store clerk. No again. The more and more he had to read through the job listings, the more and more he began to lose hope, when suddenly one of the job listings caught his eye. It was an ad for one of his most favorite childhood places, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Freddy's had been quite the place when Mike was growing up, as a kid. It had been a children's pizzeria full of games and fun attractions. The pizza was alright, but that wasn't the reason someone would go there. Everyone went to the restaurant for its animatronics. Freddy Fazbear, a brown bear with a black hat and bow tie, and the mascot of the pizzeria. There was Bonnie, a blue bunny, with a guitar. Chica, a yellow chicken with a bib sporting the words, "Let's eat." Then there was Foxy, a fox that dressed like a pirate and was set on his little stage in the back of the restaurant. Mike had so many memories of that place during its prime 10 years ago. But now it seemed the family pizzeria was nothing more than a subject of rumors and local legend. Although he was still unsure about the mystery behind the place. Taking another look at the job listing in the newspaper ad, as it read, "Help wanted, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, family pizzeria looking for a nighttime security guard to work the night shift, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., monitor cameras, ensure safety of equipment and animatronic characters, now responsible for damage, injury, death, or dismemberment. $120 a week. To apply, call 1-800-FAZ-FAZBEAR." It wasn't very decent money, but by the time his rent would arrive, he would be able to pay it on in full. He took the red pen in his hand and circled the ad. He took the paper to the kitchen where he grabbed the phone off the wall and dialed the number of the pizzeria. The phone rang for long minutes, before finally someone picked up on the other end.
"Thank you for calling Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. How can we help you?"
Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt. I'm calling because I'm interested in applying for a job as a security guard for the establishment. I saw your ad in the paper, and I was wondering if the position is still available.
Yes, that position is still available. Now, Mr. Schmidt, do you have any previous experience with this company?
The man sounded a bit anxious while asking the question. No sir, I haven't. Will that be a problem?
No, not at all. There is no company policy that requires previous experience.
Oh, well that's a relief.
Congratulations, Mike Schmidt. You've been accepted as night security guard for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Your shift starts on Monday at 12 a.m. Be there on time. Your uniform will be in the lockers in the security office, and you'll have a mentor who will teach you the basics of the job. Got it?
Whoa, really? Wow, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, very good. Goodbye, Mr. Schmidt.
And the man hung up the phone. Mike was ecstatic. He'd just gotten a job at one of his favorite places from his childhood, and it wouldn't take up any of his time during the day. He didn't really stop to think of how strange it was that they had spontaneously hired him without little question. He hadn't even met them personally. How did they know if he even looked qualified or not? At the moment, he didn't really care. He was going to be alright after all. Mike drove down the darkened roads until he finally reached the parking lot in front of the pizzeria. He stared up at the building from his car. the sign reading Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. As the cartoon animals painted on the sign seemed to look down upon him, he shivered slightly. He could feel anxiety rising in the pit of his stomach, but he quickly shook the feeling off. He needed to do this for himself. He stepped outside of the car and walked towards the restaurant's front doors, willing himself to not look back up at the sign characters. Took out the key to the building that had been mailed to him by the company after he received the job and slid it into the keyhole and unlocked the door. As soon as he made it inside the building, he was bombarded with a cold breeze that threw him off. He hadn't expected it to be so cold in the building. In fact, he was sure it was warmer outside. He had made his way into the main show area. There were no lights. No, except for a few very dim night lights in a few key areas. As he walked through the showroom, he looked up at the main stage, and there he saw them. Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, standing at attention to an empty audience. How strange it was to recite those names again, especially after all these years. He couldn't help but feel like they were watching him, but he knew that was just his nerves. They were just robots. He continued to walk around the restaurant until he spotted it. Down the hall was a room with a bright ceiling light shining into the hallway. He made his way down the hall until he was outside the room and peered in. "Hello?" he said. The room was empty. It was a security office, as he thought. He entered the room, went to the locker in the back and opened it up, pulling out a blue security guard uniform, as well as a security logbook he had been instructed to make in order to make logs for his hours at the pizzeria. He quickly got changed into the uniform. It was slightly small for him, and gave off an odd smell, but he decided to ignore it and sat in the chair set up in front of the desk. On the wall above the desk were a collection of children's drawings and posters of the animatronics. He stared up at them for a few moments. He had fond memories of doing things like this back when he used to go to the pizzeria, before noticing something on the desk in front of him. It was some kind of thin device with a large screen in front of it. He took off the sticky note that had been placed on it, and it read to him, "Press button on the side of the camera tablet to access your CCTV footage. This device is touchscreen in order to use." "Touchscreen?" he said, as he pressed the button on the side of the camera tablet to boot it up. Suddenly the feed for the main show area appeared on the screen, as well as a small mini-map in the corner with labels of each camera in the building. With his finger, he gently tapped on one of the camera labels on the map, and to his amazement, it switched over to the camera feed of the janitor's closet. "Whoa, pretty futuristic stuff," he said to himself. He tapped each camera label to make sure they were all working, until he came to the kitchen camera, which had no feed and read, "Camera disabled, audio only." That's weird, he thought to himself, and continued checking the other cameras. He was startled when the phone rang in the room, which he hadn't originally noticed was there. As the answering machine's small red light began to flash, he reached over and pressed the button, and a man's voice came over the phone speaker.
Hello? Hello? I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of fact, so I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. So let's just focus on getting you through your first week, okay? Let's see. First, there's an introductory greeting from the company that I'm supposed to read. It's kind of a legal thing, you know. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. Upon discovering that damage or death has occurred, a missing person report will be filed within 90 days or as soon as property and premises have been thoroughly cleaned and bleached and the carpets have been replaced. Blah, blah, blah. Now, that might sound bad, I know, but there's really nothing to worry about. The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night, but do I blame them? No. If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too. So remember, these characters hold a special place in the hearts of children and we need to show them a little respect, right? Okay. So just be aware, the characters do tend to wander a bit. They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too. But then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
Mike slightly froze. He had heard rumors of such an event, but had never actually known if they were true. And had that person really survived? He wondered. Freddy's had in fact opened a new restaurant in 1987, but the pizzeria had been shut down only after a few weeks of operation. It was a shock how they managed to keep this one open. He'd only gone there a few times, mostly for birthday parties. There always was a fun carousel he would like to ride, though.
Now, concerning your safety, the only real risk to you as a Night Watchman here, if any, is the fact that these characters, if they happen to see you after hours, probably won't recognize you as a person. They'll most likely see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on. Now, since that's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with cross beams, wires, and animatronic devices, especially around the facial area. So you can imagine how having your head forcefully pressed inside one of those could cause a bit of discomfort and death. The only parts of you that would likely see the light of day again would be your eyeballs and teeth when they pop out the front of the mask.
Dear God, he whispered to himself as he watched the animatronics through the video feed.
Yeah, they don't tell you these things when you sign up. But hey, first station of the breeze. I'll chat with you tomorrow. Check those cameras and remember to close the doors only if absolutely necessary. Gotta conserve power. Alright, good night.
Power? He thought, until he noticed the power indicator on the side of the camera tablet screen, reading he had 95% power left. Isn't this stuff supposed to last him all night? He thought. But he realized it was probably because he left the camera feed on for long, so he pressed the button on the side of the screen to deactivate it, and waited some time before checking the camera feed again. And as he activated the cameras again, the main stage came into view, and Mike nearly fell out of his seat as he saw all animatronics with their heads turned towards the camera. "What the?" he yelled as he almost fell back out of his chair, dropping the camera tablet. After stopping himself from falling, he picked up the camera tablet and looked at the feed again. The animatronics were standing as they should be, and weren't looking at the camera like he thought. Mike nervously laughed to himself. Must be seeing things. Probably from lack of sleep, he thought. He stared back up at the camera feed, but his eyes widened when he realized one of the animatronics was missing. Bonnie. Bonnie was missing. Where was Bonnie? He switched around the video feeds until he finally found him. Bonnie was standing in the show area among the empty party room tables. The guy on the phone wasn't kidding, he thought to himself. These things really did wander. For some reason, the image of this was slightly off-putting, seeing Bonnie just standing by himself in the dark and empty showroom. He continued to watch Bonnie for a while before the camera turned off. He checked his watch. It was 2 a.m. Time had gone by quicker than he had thought. A little while later, he checked the camera feed once again, but this time, Bonnie was gone. He searched through the camera feeds looking for the rabbit, but he couldn't find him. Suddenly he heard sounds from outside somewhere in the office. But the footsteps, they didn't sound human. They were too robotic, heavy. He immediately went to the doorway and pressed the light button outside the office, and nearly screamed when he saw Bonnie standing larger than life above him, peering into the office. And Mike immediately slammed his hand against the door button, and a giant metal door slid down, blocking Bonnie off. Mike nearly jumped back as the door slammed against the floor. Jeez! That's some heavy-duty security door, he thought, as he sat back down. After a minute or so, he thought he could hear Bonnie walk away from the doorway, and he mustered up enough courage to open the door and turn on the light again. He did so, and he was right. Bonnie was no longer there. He was much more on edge now, for the rest of the night. Bonnie only came close to him a few more times, and even Chica started moving around at some point. But Mike tried to remind himself that they were just machines. By the end of the night, he walked out of the building, shaken up by what he'd experienced. They're just robots, he kept telling himself. They can't hurt you. The next night, he had entered the restaurant swiftly, being in the security office within minutes. He knew it wasn't necessary, but maybe he thought that if he was in the office faster, then perhaps the night would go faster as well. He knew he could make it through this week, and he'd become a full-time employee, which is what he wanted. As he sat down at the desk, the phone began to ring like it had the previous night, and he pressed the button and another message began to play.
Hello? Hello? Well, if you're hearing this and you made it to day 2, congrats. I won't talk quite as long this time since Freddy and his friends tend to become more active as the week progresses. It might be a good idea to peek at those cameras while I talk, just to make sure everyone's in their proper place, you know.
Following the man's advice, Mike hooked up with a camera tablet and turned it on, surveying each of the cameras with close inspection.
Interestingly enough, Freddy himself doesn't come off stage very often. I've heard he becomes a lot more active in the dark, though, so hey, I guess that's one more reason not to run out of power, right? I also want to emphasize the importance of using your door lights. There are blind spots in your camera views, and those blind spots happen to be right outside your doors. So if you can't find something or someone on your cameras, be sure to check the door light. You might only have a few seconds to react. Not that you would be in any danger, of course. I'm not implying that. Also, check on the curtain in Pirate Cove from time to time. The character in there seems unique in that he becomes more active if the cameras remain off for long periods of time. I guess he doesn't like being watched.
Pirate's Cove? Mike wondered, as he checked the camera feed in that area. In the camera view was a miniature stage with a purple star curtain. An out-of-order sign had been placed in front of the stage.
I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure you have everything under control. Talk to you soon.
As he continued to stare at Pirate's Cove, he had nearly forgotten to check any of the other cameras. He switched the camera feed on the main stage. Chica was missing. He switched through each of the cameras until he finally found her standing in Cam 7 near the restrooms. She was undoubtedly staring up at the camera. But how? He thought. Do they know they're being watched? He switched back to the camera in Pirate's Cove, and he was startled to see the curtains had now been opened back slightly, and an animatronic's face was staring back at him as it poked its head out. Foxy. He thought as he stared into the animatronic's silver eyes through the monitor. He suddenly heard through the footsteps approaching his office from the right side. He turned the light on outside the door, revealing Chica, standing at the window peering in at him, her jaw opened wide, showing an endoskeleton teeth beneath. He immediately shut the door before the robot could make any sort of movements towards the doorway, and waited. After a few minutes, he checked the light again, and Chica was gone. As he opened the door right back again, he glanced at the camera feed at Pirate's Cove, and was alarmed when he saw Foxy was no longer there at the stage, and the curtains were completely open. He frantically searched every camera closest to him, until he found him. Foxy was sprinting down the hall towards his office at terrifying speed. Mike let out a scream as he scrambled to close the door, the fox's nose being barely inches from his face as the metal door slammed to the floor. All was silent for a split second, before heavy pounding came at the door, pounding like something was trying to get inside. Mike felt his blood turn cold at this reality. These things were hostile. No glitched AI could be rushed down the hall like that just to get him. Something was very wrong with these machines, but he didn't know what. The chime of 6 a.m. couldn't have come soon enough, and he headed home, even more shaken than he had been the night before. What was going on? Mike didn't speak a word the next day, mostly caught up in his own thoughts. Why were they trying to get him? What was wrong with all of them? There was no way they could act like this, even if they were malfunctioning. But as much as he wanted to find answers to these questions, a part of him was too afraid to. The next night, when he made it into the office, he made sure to check all the cameras first, then pressed the button to relay the nightly message.
Hello? Hey, you're doing great. Most people don't last this long. I mean, you know, they usually move on to other things by now. I'm not implying that they died. That's not what I meant.
He would have believed that if he was still on day one.
Anyway, I better not take up too much of your time. Things are getting real tonight. Hey, listen, I had an idea. If you happen to get caught, and want to avoid getting stuffed into a Freddy suit, try playing dead. You know, go limp. Then there's a chance that maybe they'll think that you're an empty costume instead. Then again, if they think you're an empty costume, they might try to stuff a metal skeleton into you. I wonder how that would work. Yeah, never mind. Scratch that. It's best just not to get caught. Okay, I'll leave you to it. See you on the flip side.
Yeah, right, he thought to himself. As the night progressed, Bonnie and Chica frequently moved around the building, and Foxy tried to get into his office a few times. It wasn't until nearing the end of the night that he checked the main show area and realized something was wrong. Freddy was gone. He started to panic. Freddy had never moved before. He checked each camera until he spotted the bear, standing in the darkness of the show area, staring up at the camera, his eyes glowing menacingly in the dark. And Mike stared right back at him through the screen, not daring to switch into any of the other cameras. Eventually 6 a.m. came around and he was able to go home. He would later drive home, and his anxiety was building as he knew they were all awake now. And if he made one mistake, they would get him. But what would they do if they got him? Stuff him into a Freddy Fazbear suit like the phone guy said? Or something worse? When Mike entered the office the next night, it was a mess. The desk fan tipped over, and there were papers strewn all over the floor of the office. What the hell happened here? He picked up the chair off the floor and sat down in it, picking up the camera tablet, which now had a small crack in the corner of the screen. He reached over and pressed the button to receive the nightly message left behind by the former guard, but as it began to play, he realized something was wrong. The man sounded almost afraid as he spoke.
Oh, hello! Hey, wow, day 4. I knew you could do it. Hey, listen, I may not be around to send you a message tomorrow. It's been a bad night here for me. I'm kind of glad that I recorded my messages for you. When I did. Mike felt anxiety building, as he could very clearly hear the sounds of something banging in the door over the message. Hey, do me a favor. Maybe sometime you could check inside those suits in the back room. I'm going to try to hold out until someone checks. Maybe it won't be so bad. I always wondered what was in all those empty heads. Mike could hear an oh-so-familiar jingle playing in the form of a music box. Oh no. Suddenly the man's voice was cut off by the sound of something on the other side of the phone, and then the message ended abruptly. What? Hello? Hello? Mike asked aloud, not caring if anyone heard him. He was panicking now more than ever, constantly checking every single camera every few minutes. The animatronics progressed quicker than they had any of the previous nights before. Foxy had charged him at least 3 times, Bonnie and Chica frequently showing up at his door, and Freddy came to the office at one point but not entering, just staring at him through the camera. Mike could feel terror sinking into his stomach. How was any of this happening? This isn't real. It can't be real. This is all just one big nightmare. If only he had believed those thoughts. But this was real. Mike was not constantly checking cameras so much as he barely had enough power to save to make it to 6 a.m. He spared no time rushing out of the building as soon as his shift was over. And he stood in the parking lot for a long time, feeling like he wanted to vomit, but he knew he wouldn't. When he made it home, he immediately rushed to his room, not bothering to take his uniform off. He just sat down on his bed, trying to steady himself. But it wasn't long before he felt the vomit he had wanted to release in the parking lot begin to rise in his throat, and he forced him to rush into the bathroom. He sat over the toilet for a few minutes, gagging. After vomiting was done, he was surprised to hear his sickly breaths turn into stifled cries. He had reached his limit. He could only take so much of this, especially after everything else in his life. All of this was just too much to handle. On his drive back to the pizzeria that night, Mike tried his best to mentally prepare himself for whatever this final night would bring. Just one more night, he kept telling himself. Then he'd become a full-time employee and move over to the day shift. He needed the money, but he also didn't want to spend a second here at night.
But he knew no matter how much he tried to prepare himself, his fears would not subside. Once inside the building, he ran past the main show area and into his office, forcing himself not to look at the animatronics as he walked by them. But he didn't have to look at them to know they were watching him with those fake, lifeless, plastic eyes. Once inside the office, he set up everything as he regularly did, but was suddenly startled when the phone in the room began to ring like it had the previous nights. That's not possible, he thought to himself, but decided to press the button anyway to receive the message. He thought maybe it was left by another employee, but he was wrong. A loud, garbled voice erupted from the phone's speaker. Before the message abruptly ended, Mike knew it must have been the machines that had left this horrid message. But that didn't matter now. The first thing he did was survey all the cameras to where he knew the animatronics would frequently move. That way, he could track their movement patterns and give himself the advantage. He would leave the camera on in Pirate's Cove. Whenever he wasn't using or looking at there, he would soon check the main stage camera, where, as he suspected, all the animatronics were gone. He switched back to Pirate's Cove, and Foxy was already peering out of his curtain. This is it, he thought. No getting scared now. He would constantly check each character through their movement orders, which he had picked up over the past few days, all while frequently checking Pirate's Cove as Foxy would go ever closer and closer to charging. But when he did, Mike was ready, slamming the door shut in his face, and viewing the cameras and opening up as soon as Foxy would leave. Bonnie and Chica would constantly go back and forth trying to enter his office, all while Freddy inched ever closer as the night progressed. After many hours of each animatronic trying to attack him, Mike had managed to fend them off with built-up precision, speed, and focus. By the waning hours of the night, he had both doors closed. Bonnie and Chica were standing outside both doorways of his office, and Freddy was waiting in the corner as Foxy was getting ready to charge from his cove one last time. Mike checked Pirate's Cove one more time before shutting down the camera system for good. There was nothing it could do for him now. He was surrounded. Suddenly, the lights in the office began to flicker, and then abruptly, the entire building was plunged into darkness. The sound of the building's generator shutting down echoed throughout the halls. Mike felt his entire world shrivel up and die in that one moment, as the doors beside him were forced open, and he was left in complete darkness. The cold air from the rest of the building filled the office. He didn't dare move as he heard the sound of a single pair of footsteps on the left entrance of the office. Suddenly, two white lights shined into the room. Mike looked up and realized that it was Freddy's glowing eyes in the darkness, staring at him. He could hear Freddy's music box begin to play as his face flashed in the dark. Mike felt his body go limp. This was it. He was going to die here. He would be killed and stuffed into a suit, or whatever horrific way these things killed their prey. He didn't try to hold back his tears as Freddy's song came to a close. His face stopped glowing, leaving Mike in total darkness once again. Mike sat there and waited for what felt like hours, although it was most likely a minute, crying as he heard Freddy's deep and otherworldly laugh echo into the office, and he waited for something to grab him into the darkness of the halls and pull him away, never to be seen or heard from again. But suddenly a new sound filled the empty air. He looked down at his watch and faintly made out the timer. It read it was 6 a.m. He had made it, he thought. The office was quiet and there was no sound. He quickly backed out of the security office into the right hall, praying the animatronics weren't waiting for him outside. He did his best to navigate through the darkened hallway. He had no light source, and it was hard to see where he was going. He could hear something behind him. It was distant, but coming closer. The mechanical stopping of one of the animatronics coming down the hall. He felt himself bump into the door and gently grip the knob and turning it, sliding inside and shut the door behind him. He knew he had to hide somewhere, and he had to do it quickly. The steps outside of the room were becoming closer and closer. He frantically looked around and realized he was in the kitchen. There was a slightly open cupboard door, and it looked big enough for him to fit. so he settled for it and scrambled inside, hugging his knees to his chest. The squeeze wasn't so tight. He barely managed to pull the cupboard door shut just before the second door bust open with force. Mike shuddered at the sound and tried to keep his heavy breathing quiet. He had no idea how good the animatronics' hearings were, but his breathing was far too loud, and he knew it. It was quiet outside the space for a while, so he decided to quietly and silently crack open the cupboard door and peek out into the darkness of the kitchen. He could see Chica's figure standing near the doorway of the kitchen, staring blankly into the room. Suddenly, her head jerked in his direction, and he frantically tried to pull the door shut as quickly and quietly as he could. He wasn't sure if she had seen him or not, but he was too afraid to check again. He then heard the sound of Chica's pounding footsteps walk near to the cupboards, and he felt himself wanting to cry again, but he had to keep quiet. Suddenly he heard the loud clamor of what sounded like pots and pans being thrown around and crashing to the floor as he was searching for him. He was sure he was good as dead. She would find him in one of these cupboards. Dead, just like the other guard, and no one would ever even find his body or knew what happened to him. And this company would just cover it up, and it would be like Mike Schmidt had never even existed. Suddenly the clamoring stopped abruptly, and there was silence outside. He wondered if Chica was even still in the room, and then he picked up on a noise. It was low, quiet as a whisper and barely audible, but something about it was oddly familiar to him. Then he could hear the sound of Chica stomp away from the kitchen outside the cupboard and walk out of the kitchen door before he heard the sound of it closing behind him. Mike slowly summoned up the courage to peek outside the cupboard door again, only to find that the kitchen was now empty. Chica had left. He was confused. He slowly pushed open the cupboard door all the way and got up, only to land on some pots and pans that had been scattered across the floor, making a loud clang. Mike cringed as he was sure Chica was going to hear the sound and come stomping back into the kitchen, but after a minute of silence he realized that wasn't the case. He got to his feet, avoiding hitting any of the pots and pans in the kitchen, and scattered across the floor. Something felt wrong, though, like he still wasn't alone in the room. He felt like a prey being stalked by a predator, and it felt like every fiber in his body was on edge. He looked around the room to see what was hiding in the darkness, when he noticed something of sort. A figure slumped over in the corner of the room. He nearly screamed at first, but stopped and realized that the figure before him wasn't human. It seemed to be an empty suit from one of the animatronics. One of the suits he thought he would have seen in the backstage area. It had the same shape and features as Freddy Fazbear, but something was different about it. So he leaned closer and realized this Freddy was yellow. He felt anxiety begin to rise with this. He had sworn he had seen this thing before, but he hadn't been sure if it was real or not. It would have been nice to know he wasn't crazy about seeing the suit, but it wasn't that case in the moment. That was the furthest thing from his mind. He kneeled down in front of the slumped-over yellow bear and stared into it, the void in its eyes. He felt so cold as he did. And then he heard the whispering again. It started low, but slowly it began to get louder and louder, to an audible whisper. Then he couldn't understand exactly what the voice was whispering, but it sounded like a small child. It was strange. The voice was familiar to him somehow. He couldn't explain it even if he wanted to. Suddenly, a small flicker of light within the gaping eye sockets of the animatronic. It was momentary and subtle, an infantile second to prove life was inside the bear. "Hello?" Mike said.
Hello.
The bear remained motionless, but Mike could hear the voice whispering to him, as if repeating him. "Who? Is someone in there?" he asked, trying to see into the suit.
Someone inside.
"What are you?"
I am
the voice said. You are what? What are you? He asked again, but the voice didn't respond. Mike continued to stare into its void eyes as he waited for the voice to speak again. Are you a child? He asked.
Child.
It was strange, the way the voice responded, like it barely understood any of the words he was saying or what they meant. Who are you?
It's me.
I don't understand.
It's me, Michael.
Mike's heart dropped at the sound of hearing his full name being said by the bear. He slowly backed away from the bear as its body slowly began to rattle, as if its lifer was returning to its limbs. He burst out of the kitchen and the hall, into the showroom where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica were now all on the stage, as if preparing to perform. He was about to run out until something caught the corner of his eye, as he realized all three of the animatronics' heads on the stage were facing him, glaring at him. He immediately rushed past the robots, fleeing out of the building within seconds and slamming its doors behind him. He was sat down on the pavement, unmoving, trying to process what had all just happened that week, and had just minutes before. But he knew it didn't matter. He was alive. He was lucky to leave with that. Even though his questions were not answered about the animatronics, he didn't care. He finally stood up, standing straight and tall. It was over, and it should be left at that. A few days later, Mike received a check in the mail, as well as a pink slip saying he was fired. The reason? Tampering with the animatronics, general unprofessionalism, and odor. Yeah, right, he thought. But he didn't care. He was happy to be out of that place. In fact, he never wanted to see that place again. Though he knew some part of him would always wonder what was happening with the animatronics or how they knew who he was. He knew he was probably better off not knowing, for the sake of himself and the rest of his life. But the thing that tormented him the most wasn't the fact that he had almost been killed. And that was something that would always and forever haunt him. He often thought about the golden bear inside of the pizzeria, and how it seemingly knew him. But he knew that he would never know the answer. And he would never have to see the name Freddy Fazbear's Pizza ever again. Or so he hoped.